I've always been motivated by food because I was always hungry. There never was enough to eat for me. I was always hungry. And there was never enough food for various reasons. One lady is hard to take care of, 6, 7 kids at one time.
The man, the legend, George Foreman knew firsthand what it was like to live in poverty. He witnessed things that most people couldn't even begin to imagine. His alcoholic father, J.D. Foreman, worked on the railroad and didn't live at home most of the time, leaving his mom to provide for her 7 children. Her salary of $26 per week didn't stretch far when 8 mouths wanted food. George was a big boy, so he was always hungry. It wasn't until years later, after he started boxing, that he could remember his stomach feeling full after a meal. His mom sometimes brought home a single hamburger for her kids and herself to divide. It was such a luxury for him. George grew up believing hamburgers were only for rich people. Her mom would tear it into 8 pieces, and they all got 1 bite. George savored the few seconds it stayed in his mouth, dreaming of the day when he might get to eat an entire hamburger by himself. Every other Sunday, she made them pancakes and allotted 1 small piece of bacon to each child. Breakfast usually consisted of a bowl of cornflakes covered with watered-down milk. Hardly the breakfast of champions. School lunches weren't any better. Most of the time, George carried a mayonnaise sandwich to school. Every now and then, his mother would slip in a thin piece of luncheon meat. He drank water with it, wishing he could afford one of those little cartons of milk that cost 6 cents. Sometimes, when he played with the neighborhood kids, their parents would call them home to eat lunch. He had no lunch waiting for him, so he would peek through the windows and watch his friends eat. His mouth watered as he'd see them tear the crust off their bread. Then they'd pull the chicken skins off their drumsticks because they didn't want them. George thought he would love to eat what they don't want. He wished they would have asked him to take their scraps out to the dogs so he could get a bite to eat too. George's mother, Nancy Ree Foreman, had grown up in poverty, being the daughter of a sharecropper who made his 8 children work for him. Although she was intelligent and desperately wanted an education, she never had the opportunity to pursue it. Her father continually made her promises he didn't keep. Just help me out this year and you can go to school next year. But next year never came, and his mother never received the education she so sincerely desired. When George was still a little boy, his mother became very sick. She was coughing constantly, wheezing, and generally feeling awful for prolonged periods of time. When she finally consented to seek medical attention, the doctor told her that she had contracted tuberculosis and needed to go to the hospital right away. His mother thought it would be a short stay, but as it turned out, she had to remain in the hospital for more than a year. During that time, George was pretty much on his own, so he spent most of his days and nights out on the streets, getting into trouble. In his early years, his mother was the only one who could control him. His dad wasn't around much as he was growing up, since his father and mother had broken up their marriage. His mother was tall and slender, not a large woman at all, but she was strong, and she believed in that adage, spare the rod, spoil the child. Usually, his mother didn't take time to find a rod when it came to disciplining him. She'd reach for whatever was close by, a belt, a big shoe, or whatever she could find, and she'd clobber him with it. His mom could throw a powerful punch too, and she wasn't above using a judo chop or a swift kick to motivate him or correct him when he did wrong. But with his mother fighting tuberculosis in the hospital, he ran wild, constantly getting into fights out on the streets. Yet somehow, even with her diminished stamina, his mother heard about his unsavory activities and contacted someone from social services. She told them, "I'm here in the hospital and I know my children are having some problems at home, but I could rest well if they would just watch this one boy of mine." His mother had 7 children, but you can guess which child she was most concerned about. The social services representative contacted a wonderful woman by the name of Bonner to help look after him. Ms. Bonner lived way out of town, but she came into the city looking for him, hoping to spend some time with him. She took an interest in him and tried to help him stay out of trouble while his mom was in the hospital. One day, Miss Bonner told him, "George, I'm going to come over on the weekend, and I'd like you to come back home with me to cut my grass. I'll pay you for working. Can I have a couple of my friends come along too? George asked. Sure you can, Miss Bonner answered. That weekend, Miss Bonner picked up 2 of his friends and him and drove them out of town to her place. She took them to the shed and showed them the lawnmower. Okay, George, you can mow the grass. You other fellows can do the trim and follow behind him to rake up the cuttings. George looked at Miss Bonner, then at his buddies. He said, okay, guys, let's get going. They worked at Miss Bonner's all day long, and he felt so good when she handed him some money as payment. More importantly, he felt good about himself. He didn't realize it fully at the time, but looking back on that experience, he now understands that Miss Bonner was allowing him to be somebody. For the first time in his life, a non-family member was telling him, "You can do it, George. I believe in you." To this day, his life is indebted to Miss Bonner. That little dash of self-esteem she helped to foster in him is still with him today. Miss Bonner made him feel so good about himself, and part of the reason he is what he is today is because of Miss Bonner. She stayed in touch with George until his mom was discharged. Unfortunately, when his mother got out of the hospital, he went right back to his old ways of stealing and beating up people. His mom didn't have time to attend church when he was a boy. She was always working, trying to earn enough to keep her children alive. But she recognized the value of church, and she believed they'd be better kids if they could get enough Bible in them. Every so often, she'd thrust a Bible in his direction and say, "Here, George, you need to get in that room and read this Bible." He'd take the Bible, flip through the pages and look at the pictures for a while, and then return the book to his mother. "See there. Don't you feel better now?" She'd ask hopefully. "Oh yeah, Mom, I feel a lot better now." He lied. By the time he was 16 years of age, he was a vicious, savage teenager, picking fights in school or wherever he went. Not surprisingly, he dropped out of school in 9th grade and started looking for a job. But not too many people want to hire a 9th grade dropout. Eventually, he took a job washing dishes in a restaurant. He figured that his only way out of poverty was to use his fists and fight his way out. Sometimes he beat up 2 or 3 people a day. He was brutal too. One time he walked up to a guy who hadn't done anything to him, and without warning, he punched him right in the face just to be nasty. That guy hit the dirt like a rock. George walked away with him, still laid out semi-conscious on the ground. Why not? Because his conscience was so encrusted with hate, it didn't bother him to see people bleeding or knocked out cold. Many times he mugged people just to get some drinking money. He was really good at beating up people, although it never dawned on him at the time that one day people would pay to watch him fight. George's older brother, Robert, he called him Sonny, his friends called him Rags, was a hardworking family man with a wife and 2 children. 10 years older than him, Sonny lived in a nice house and earned a good living by working for a moving company, Wald Transfer and Storage. Sonny recognized that George was heading in the wrong direction, so he offered to help him get a job with Wald. "It's hard work," Sonny told him, "but if you do a good job and the boss is like you, they may put you on full-time and you can be a regular." George really wanted to be a regular too, since if his boss hired him full-time, the company provided a uniform with his name embroidered above the pocket. He went to work for Wald and quickly discovered that his brother was telling him the truth. It was hard work, with long, grueling hours, often from 8 in the morning till midnight, but he earned $1.25 per hour for loading and unloading heavy furniture. That was more money than he could count. Wald specialized in office moves, moving the file cabinets, desks, business machines, and other heavy items from one office building to another. The items were big, bulky, and heavy, but he was young and strong. So when he saw his bosses watching, he'd give it all the extra oomph he could muster. Before long, he'd made a good impression on them, as well as his coworkers. After work, his new friends helped him spend a good portion of his earnings on alcohol. What was left, he used to help his mom. One day, the boss informed his crew that he had a high-priority office move that he needed to get done quickly. They'd have to work from early in the morning till midnight every day until they could get it all done. The first day was bad enough, with all that heavy lifting and carrying. After the second day, He was dead tired, his back was sore, and he was ready to quit. By the end of the third day, he was exhausted. When he took his dinner break around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the boss instructed him to be back in an hour. He was so worn out, he went home and fell asleep. He didn't wake up until the following morning. He was so ashamed of himself, he never went back to work at Wald, not even to pick up his paycheck. He knew that he had not only disobeyed his boss and probably forfeited any chance of getting the uniform with his name on it, but he'd also embarrassed his brother, Sonny. The other guys on the crew teased him incessantly. Rags' brother couldn't carry the load. Rags' brother took a break for dinner, and old Rags' lazy brother never came back. "Where were you? Why didn't you come back?" Sonny asked George when he talked to him about his disappearing act. "Man, I was just too tired," George told him honestly. The following week, Sonny and he talked again, and he told George that Wald had some big moves coming up, and they needed to hire some extra help. Sonny thought they might be willing to hire him if he went and told the boss the truth. "You're strong, and you're a hard worker," Sonny said to George. "The boss is like that. Just tell the boss that you have an explanation why you didn't come back," Sonny suggested, and he thinks the boss will not only take him back, but he will hire him full-time. Just apologize and make up a good explanation. George wasn't quite sure what an explanation was. It wasn't a word he used, but he figured it was worth a try if he could get his job back. He went to see the moving company crew chief, a tough guy who'd been moving furniture for longer than he had been alive. "I'd like to get my job back," he told him. When the boss saw George, he didn't even want to look at him, much less carry on a conversation about rehiring him. "You walked off the job, Foreman," he said curtly. "I know, yes I did, sir. But I have an ESX." George's mind was drawing a blank. What was that word Sonny told him to use? "I have an explanation," George finally blurted. The boss glared at him as he threw his pay envelope in his direction. "Look, Foreman, I don't want to hear about your explanation. Take your money and get out of here. Don't you ever come back around here no more. If I see you around here, I'm going to call the cops. But, take your money and your explanation and hit the road." So that was it about Always Hungry George in this video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.